another Maryland Terrapins video. Who would have thought? But yeah, I'm a Maryland Terrapins fan, and the football team is playing well, so I want to continue talking about them.
You're an alcoholic.
And I want to look at their quarterback history, not so much their quarterback history, but these are just some of the quarterbacks that played for the Terrapins that went on to have more sustained NFL careers. There is one Hall of Famer in this bunch, but for the most part, Maryland isn't necessarily a place where when you play quarterback, you're going to go and necessarily succeed in the NFL. Some of these guys were okay, and some of these guys had longevity, but for the most part, they didn't really light up the stat sheet a lot. And I think the first one I want to talk about is a guy with a very funny first name, that being Dick Shiner. You've probably seen this guy's name on a list of like funniest football names of all time, and he was in the NFL in the mid to late 60s and played for a while for some pretty bad teams. But yeah, from 1961 to 1963 he was a Terrapins quarterback, and well, I mean, he did lead the ACC in passing yards in 1962 along with completions and attempts, but he threw 21 touchdowns, 35 interceptions, and barely over 3,000 yards passing in his career. So it was nothing really spectacular, but again, he had a pretty long NFL career. Then the next guy we're actually going to talk about is Bob Avellini. This may or may not be a name that you know, but back in 1972, Maryland decided to start Bob Avellini at quarterback, and well, what they ended up getting is basically how his NFL career would turn out. Just kind of, you know, not necessarily terrible numbers, because he did have a pretty solid completion percentage back in the day. I mean, in his Maryland career, he completed 58.6% of his passes, but he never threw for more than 1,600 yards, and he had 15 touchdowns to 25 interceptions in his career, although that 1,648 yards he threw for in 1974 led the ACC, along with yards per game that year. He just wasn't necessarily great. And even when the Bears took a chance on him in the 6th round of the 1975 NFL draft, he really wouldn't get his start until 1977, where the Bears would go to the postseason, but mainly not because of Bob Avellini, but because Walter Payton basically carried them to the playoffs, and that was mainly the highlight of Bob Avellini's NFL career. And then Maryland didn't necessarily have to wait too long for their next good quarterback, and this is probably the most well-known one out of the bunch, because whether you know him from his playing days or his time as an analyst, you definitely know who Boomer Esiason is. And there's probably people out there who don't even know that he went to Maryland and was the Terps quarterback from 1981 to 1983. And in 1981, he actually struggled, but in 1982, he threw 18 touchdowns, 10 picks. Maryland went to a bowl game. And then in 1983, he would throw for 2,322 yards with 15 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and actually finished 10th in Heisman voting. When was the last time you heard of a Maryland Terrapins quarterback finishing that high in Heisman voting, let alone getting votes at all? He also became the highest drafted Maryland Terrapins quarterback, as he was taken in round 2 of the 1984 NFL draft by the team he's most associated with, that being the Cincinnati Bengals. And of course, we all know what he would do for the Bengals. He would take over for an aging Ken Anderson, and by 1988, Boomer Esiason won NFL MVP, took the Bengals to the Super Bowl, being one of 4 Maryland Terrapins quarterbacks who went to a Super Bowl in the NFL, which we'll get to the other 3 in a minute. And of course, Esiason played for the Jets a little bit, 1 year with the Cardinals, so he had a long 14-year NFL career leading to the Hall of Fame, and had a pretty solid career at Maryland, to say the least. Almost 6,300 passing yards, 42 touchdowns, 27 interceptions, and Heisman voting to boot. Maryland had this weird thing, though, where at one point they had 3 future NFL quarterbacks on their roster at once, because who was roommates with Boomer Esiason during his last couple seasons at Maryland? Well, none other than Frank Reich, another name that you either know or don't know. Most people would know him more for being a coach at this point in time, but there's others that know him for one thing, and we will get to that in a minute. At Maryland, though, Reich's career is interesting because in 82 and 83, he was mainly a backup and barely played, but in 1984, he would take over for the next quarterback that we're going to be talking about, and he would complete 64% of his passes with 1,446 yards, 9 touchdowns to 5 picks, completing his Maryland career with 10 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and 1,700 yards. Again, nothing spectacular, but there's one game in his collegiate career that is infamous in NCAA football history, as in week 9 of 1984, the Maryland Terrapins were sitting at 5-3, and they were taking on the defending national champion Miami Hurricanes, who were just a powerhouse at this point. They were one of those teams that was starting to just rise up and keep going higher and higher. And Maryland, well, they met their match. They were down 31-0 at halftime, and all looked lost. But Frank Reich helped Maryland secure a 42-40 come-from-behind victory, making it one of the biggest comebacks in college football history.
Reich will put it up again. Uh-oh. He's got the man downfield, and it's Greg Hill. Oh, look at that! Off the deflection from Darrell Fullington. Greg Hill has a touchdown.
And Maryland would go to a bowl game this year at 9-3 and win the bowl game with Frank Reich, something they weren't able to do with Boomer Esiason. But another interesting thing is Frank Reich would also do the same thing in the NFL, as although he had a long NFL career, again, mainly as a backup, his highlight in his NFL career was in the playoffs nonetheless. The 1992 wildcard game, Buffalo Bills, which is the team he got drafted by in 1985, against the Houston Oilers. And Jim Kelly was out of the picture for this game because he was injured, meaning that Frank Reich had to step in, and the Bills were getting demolished 35-3 late in the third quarter. But then something just clicked, and the Bills completed what was at the time the greatest comeback in NFL history, winning 41-38. And after that, Frank Reich would play here and there, including being the second of 4 Maryland quarterbacks to play in a Super Bowl, and obviously we know how that went for the Bills, so Maryland quarterbacks are currently 0-2 when they play in Super Bowls. His career at Maryland wasn't great, but it was memorable for some reasons, and the fact that he was also roommates with Boomer Esiason.
And they were roommates.
Oh my God, they were roommates.
So the guy that Frank Reich replaced was actually the first guy to take over once Boomer Esiason was drafted, and that is Stan Gelbaugh, who kind of like Reich in 81 and 82, spent time as a backup but then missed all of 1983 with an injury. In 1984, he would take over as a starter but struggle. In 1985, he would get his only full season, throwing for 2,400 yards with 15 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, and Maryland would win yet another bowl game, finishing in the top 25. And he would go to the NFL, get drafted by the Dallas Cowboys in the 6th round of the 1986 draft. He's also known for his time with the Cardinals. So just another one of those ones who wasn't great, and even when he did get his opportunity, it wasn't fantastic and wasn't necessarily the reason the Terrapins were good, but had a pretty, not solid NFL career, but long NFL career enough. And then shortly after, in 1987, there's a guy on this list who becomes the third of the 4 Maryland quarterbacks to appear and even play in a Super Bowl. And this one I actually didn't even know until doing my research for this video, but how many of y'all remember Neil O'Donnell as a Maryland Terrapin?
I have no idea what's going on.
Neil O'Donnell's time with Maryland was complicated because, again, he wasn't great. I mean, he did have a solid touchdown-interception ratio in 1989 with 10 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, but he threw for under 5,000 yards in his career with 26 touchdowns, 21 interceptions, and completed 59% of his passes, so I don't know what prompted the Steelers to take him in the 3rd round of the 1990 NFL draft, but they did. And you know what? From 1991 to 1995, the Steelers went from, kind of where are they going to be to rising back up, and by 1995 they were in the Super Bowl playing the Dallas Cowboys, which is where Neil O'Donnell is infamous, but not for winning this game, no, meaning that Maryland Terrapin quarterbacks are 0-3 in Super Bowls. His legacy is basically throwing 2 bad interceptions in this game, leaving the Steelers in free agency, signing with the Jets, that being a complete and total bust, and just kind of being a backup for the rest of his career. But the fact that he started in 1990 and I believe retired in 2004, he again had longevity, and mainly toward the end of his career was known for being Steve McNair's backup in Tennessee. And his time in Maryland wasn't necessarily great either, but had some nice moments. Then the second to last guy we're going to be talking about that played in the NFL also was the 4th and final Maryland Terrapins quarterback to play in a Super Bowl. Now, he didn't start this game because of a guy named Drew Bledsoe, but Scott Zolak is also here. Zolak also started a playoff game for the Patriots when Bledsoe was hurt in 1997. Now, he didn't get his chance to start until 1990, as he didn't play much in 88. In 89, he played sparingly, but in 1990, he was there, I guess. I mean, he led the ACC in completions and attempts, along with passing yards, and he had 10 touchdowns, but here was the big thing. 19 interceptions, which led the ACC. He threw for 235 yards a game, so that's pretty good as well. And hey, Maryland made a bowl game this year. He would be the last Maryland quarterback until the next one that we're going to be talking about to make a bowl game again until 2001, because Maryland would be terrible after this. I mean, sure, they did have a guy like Scott Milanovic who could sling the ball around, but, you know, they never really had too much talent around him to continuously win. But in 2001, when Ralph Friedgen got into town, I talked about this in a separate video, but the next guy that we're talking about, the last guy that we're going to be talking about, and the most recent Maryland Terrapins quarterback to play in an NFL game, and heck, even start in an NFL game, is Shaun Hill. Another one that you may or may not know the name of. I mean, he's more of an NFL journeyman than anything. Like, he had his chance to start in the NFL a couple of times, mainly, you know, with the 49ers and all that is what most people remember him for. And I think he was with the Rams for a little bit. Like, I'm trying to remember all the teams he was on. The Lions, he played when Matthew Stafford was injured. And again, he had some good moments, but he was never great. But, you know, journeyman longevity, mainly as a backup, he couldn't stay away, and teams couldn't stay away from him for the most part. Most of 2000, he only played 6 games. Played decently though, but it was 2001 where he actually took off, as he would start in every game but one, throw for over 2,300 yards with 13 touchdowns, just 9 interceptions, and complete 60% of his passes while also adding 309 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns on the ground. So he was a little agile. He did have under 3 yards per carry in his collegiate career rushing, but you gotta remember, in college, when a quarterback gets sacked, that doesn't go toward their passing stats, that goes toward their rushing stats, so that probably had a lot to do with it. Now granted, those would be his only 2 years he would start at Maryland, and he would actually go undrafted before getting a shot in the NFL, but, you know, that 2001 season was so magical for the Terps because out of nowhere they somehow just made the Orange Bowl, and they would lose to Florida, but with Shaun Hill at the helm, it was like they had a competent quarterback who didn't make many mistakes, and Maryland went from just mediocre 5-6 team to a 10-win team just like that. Now, ever since Shaun Hill, there has been no Maryland quarterback to, I even think, take a snap in the NFL since then. I could be wrong on that front, but it's not to say that Maryland hasn't had good quarterbacks since Shaun Hill. I mean, right after him, Scott McBride came in and had a nice 2-year run for the Terps. Sam Hollenbach was pretty decent. Chris Turner was okay in itself. Danny O'Brien had his one really good year in 2010. Then, of course, you had the years of C.J. Brown, who, when he was healthy, could really do a lot in the air and on the ground. And more recently, you want to talk about Tualia Tungavailoa, who transferred from Alabama to Maryland in 2020, and by 2021, he became one of the best, if not the best, Maryland quarterbacks ever, as he would end up not only setting the Maryland passing yards record, but the Big Ten passing yards record, and he would also have the most career touchdown passes of any Maryland Terrapins quarterback ever, and somehow he never even got a shot in the NFL. I don't know, it's weird. Like, I thought maybe because his brother was Tua, he would get a shot, and to me, he looked like the better pure passer than his brother, but he's playing in the CFL right now, so I guess there's kind of some success there, but I really thought he would be an NFL draft pick. Not a first rounder, just an NFL draft pick, but he never got a shot. But who knows? With Malik Washington, I mean, he's only a freshman, so we won't know for another 3 or 4 years or so, but if he keeps up this pace and continues improving what he needs to improve upon, he could not only get drafted in the NFL, but could potentially be a first-round pick in the future, which is something that Maryland has never had at the quarterback position, with Boomer Esiason being picked 38th overall in the second round of 1984, being the highest a Maryland quarterback has ever been taken. But hey, that is just my thoughts on things. You can tell me in the comments below, what do you think? Who is the greatest quarterback in Maryland Terrapins history? And maybe there are some other Terrapins quarterbacks that played in the NFL that I didn't mention. I just wanted to mention the ones that had some sort of career, like long career. Like, I didn't want to talk about someone like, I believe I saw that, what was his name? There was a quarterback that like played in the 70s and 80s for the Terps, but he only ever appeared in one NFL game. Like, I didn't want to do that because then we would be here all day, but for the most part, these are the ones I think that have the names attached to them. I might even go through some NFL players just in general that you may not have known have played for Maryland, because there's actually some pretty interesting names in their history that have played in the NFL and have done a pretty decent job. But until then, that's it for me. Stay safe out there, and I will catch you all in the next one.